you say? Yes, it's that time again. It's Tech Tuesday. Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week we're going to be talking about Snare Drum EQ, but first I want to show you something really cool, a free resource developed by the Ascension team. EasterResources.com will take you to this free page where we've got just a bunch of different resources, you guessed it, for Easter, for you and for your church, including some featured songs, some popular set lists that are going on, and even some information from yours truly. We've got some free sound check information, including 3 videos and a PDF that you can share with your team, in case you're adding any new elements to your church worship team, and want to figure out the best way to sound check that effectively for your sound and for your in-ears and all that good stuff. So really cool. Again, you can find that at EasterResources.com. We hope that's a helpful thing for you and your team. Please feel free to share that around with any other churches that are looking for something similar. But today we're talking about Snare Drum EQ. This is not a definitive end of the road EQ for you, but it shows you kind of what I listen for when I'm deciding what to boost or cut and the tone that I'm going for. So the purpose of today is to show you how to remove unwanted resonances. So like certain tones that tend to stick out in each snare drum. Again, something you could fix with tuning a lot of times, but we are going to make it work with EQ because that's what we have available today. We're going to enhance or decrease the presence or air, and we're going to enhance and decrease the low end or punch of the snare drum. So let's take a listen to this snare and see what kind of EQ it might need on it. First of all, let me just show you our resources that we have here. We have, I tried to make this as much like an analog EQ as possible. We're using the digital EQ in Logic Pro today. But I'm going to use a lot of the same settings as what a typical 4-band EQ on an analog console would have. So we're going to have a high pass filter or low cut to cut out any unwanted low end from our signal, so we can help keep the kick and the bass guitar, this is a live recording, help keep that out of the snare drum. We will likely use a low shelf to either boost or cut the low end to give it more of that punch we talked about. We're going to use a high shelf to boost or cut the presence to make the snare drum just pop out more, or if it's too brittle to make it feel a little bit further away. And then finally, we're going to use 1 or 2 parametric EQs or sweepable EQs. We will use these specifically for cutting to try and get rid of any of those resonances that we don't want to hear. So now let's listen to that snare. So it doesn't sound terrible, but the two things that I'm hearing are it sounds a bit thin, and for lack of a better word, it sounds a little bit cheap. And what I mean by cheap is it's just kind of got like almost like a little bit of a plasticky tone to it in the middle. And it's not a cheap snare drum. It's not a bad drummer. I think a lot of this just has to do with drum mic placement, excuse me. So we can't do anything about that now because it's been recorded, but we can use EQ to kind of meet in the middle and make it sound as good as possible. So this is going to be just a real quick tutorial on what I would do. First, I would throw on a low cut. I've got this set to 80 hertz, which is where many of the analog boards will have it set to. If you're on a digital board, it might be a good idea to sweep this up. So you can cut out anything that you don't need in there. So you could really turn this up to about 110, 120 on this particular snare and not lose any of the tone of the snare drum that you want. But in this case, we're just going to keep it at 80. And part of the reason why we're turning that on is because I'm going to use this low shelf here to boost up our bottom end and try to get a little bit more punch, a little bit more oomph out of this snare drum. Now, one thing I'm doing here that you cannot do on most of your medium to lower end analog boards is I'm going to sweep this. So I've boosted it up right now, just an arbitrary 10 dB, just because that's a fair amount so I can hear what's going on. And I'm going to boost it up until I can find where we start to get more body for the snare, and then keep going until we start to find where it starts to sound a little bit boxy, and now we know we've gone too far. So somewhere in between there is going to be good. Usually around 200 hertz is going to be where your body of your snare drum is going to sound nice. Excuse me. If you don't have a sweepable low shelf, and like I said, most analog boards and churches won't, you can use a parametric to boost if you need to. If you're going to do a boost, just make sure it's not very narrow or it might sound unnatural. But for today's purpose, I'm going to use a low shelf just so I feel like it sounds a little bit better. Here, right around there, it starts to sound a little bit beefier. Now we're starting to get some of that boxiness. Back it down. It's a bit better. So without, very thin sounding. With, without, with. So here we got a lot more punch coming in there. Let's hop over to our high shelf, and like I said, we're gonna try and get a little bit more presence out of the snare. I'm gonna put it up, I'm gonna put it down. We can hear if we like it better boosted or cut. That's down, up, off, on. So what I like about that is it just makes the snare have a little bit more crack and kind of just come out in the mix a bit more. And especially when we add in all the guitars and vocals, that's going to help it to really shine. Now, the bad thing about a high shelf is you can see, this is set at 10K, it goes a little bit further down. Same with our low shelf here, is set around 215, but it's going out a bit further. Sometimes it's a good idea to intersect a high shelf with a parametric towards the bottom of it to cut out any of the unwanted stuff that's getting added as a byproduct, and you just can't get your frequency just right. And again, we're trying to keep this about where it started at, which is 10K. Again, a lot of boards are going to start around 10K or 12K. Some of them will be a little bit lower in like the 6K area. But we're going to keep it right there, just to add a little more presence. But what I'm going to do now is I hear there's a little bit of hi-hat bleed that's coming through and a little bit of harshness from the snare that I don't like as a byproduct of this. So what I'm going to do is use a high mid, find that, I'm going to do seek and destroy. So I'm going to turn it up until it sounds like what I don't like is really emphasized, and then I'm going to cut that down, and we'll hear where that sounds like. We're on there. Here, that hi-hat's really emphasized now. So let's take that down. Maybe add a little more high shelf. So before, after. So that's subtle, but it helps get a little bit of that harshness out of there. Finally, there's a resonance that I'm hearing somewhere in the mids that is just sticking out just a little bit. maybe around 1K or a little bit lower. I'm not a huge fan of 1K. So let's see if we can't find that as like a bit of a pongy noise. And that's what I was hearing in there. So let's take a listen to this on and off. So we started with this. And then with EQ. Off. On. Off. On. And it's really nice doing this bypass because I can hear, okay, maybe we went a little bit too hard on this high shelf. So let's back that down a bit. Off. On. Off. On. Yeah, that's a lot better. So this is by no means done, but this is how I would start these kinds of things. So again, if you're doing this yourself, what we're doing here is we're using a low cut or high pass filter to cut out the unwanted low end. We are using a low shelf set around 200 hertz, actually a little bit higher, 215, to boost up some of the body of the snare drum, to get a little bit more punch out of it. In this case, there was a bit of a resonance. This snare drum actually is pretty good. There wasn't a lot of this going on. Sometimes I have to do a lot of cutting. But around 500 hertz, I found this pongy noise that it's real subtle, but it just didn't sound very good to me. It was too characteristic of the snare. So we cut that out. Because of the mic placement, there was a bit of hi-hat bleed, and the snare drum was just a little bit harsh. So around 5K, we did a cut to get rid of the harshness. And then finally, in this snare, we wanted a little more presence. So we boosted from 10K up using a high shelf, and then added some presence in there. A note about this, in this particular recording, I've muted the bottom snare mic so that you're just hearing a one mic scenario for the snare. If you don't want to do a lot of this, but you need more presence, and again, you're maybe running into a lot of cymbal bleed, you can go a little bit easier on this and maybe boost some of your highs using that bottom snare microphone, which is a good way to kind of meet in the middle on this. But this is if we're using just one microphone to get the snare to pop as much as possible. And again, finally, here's what it sounded like before and after. Before and after. Hope this has been helpful for you and your team. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below, or you can email me at TechTuesday@ascensionworship.com. And remember that this show is designed to help you. So the questions that you ask often become the future shows that we use. And again, I hope you guys are getting ready for Easter. If there's any help you might need, check out this free resource. It's easterresources.com, and we think that could be really helpful for you. Until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.